Rebecca pulled into her driveway after a long Tuesday at the office, already thinking about kicking off her shoes and maybe ordering takeout. She grabbed her bag from the passenger seat and headed toward the front door, but something caught her eye. Wet footprints, a trail of them leading from her backyard gate all the way across the driveway. Her stomach dropped a little. This wasn't the first time. She walked around to the side gate, the one that led to her pool area, and found it slightly ajar. Again. Rebecca pushed it open and stepped into her backyard, and sure enough, there were more signs. One of her pool loungers was in a completely different spot than where she'd left it that morning. A couple of towels she kept folded on the outdoor shelf were missing, and the water level in the pool looked noticeably lower. With wet patches all around the deck, someone had been using her pool. Again. Rebecca stood there for a moment, hands on her hips, trying to process what was happening. This had been going on for about 3 weeks now. At first, she thought maybe she was imagining things. Maybe she'd forgotten where she put the lounger. Maybe the towels had blown away in the wind. But the wet footprints, the moved furniture, the lower water level, this was deliberate. Someone was coming into her yard while she was at work and treating her pool like it was a public swimming area. She lived in Oakmont Hills, one of those planned communities with an HOA that had rules for absolutely everything. The kind of place where you could get a violation notice if your trash cans were visible from the street on the wrong day, or if you planted the wrong color flowers in your front yard. Rebecca had already had her share of run-ins with the HOA, mostly thanks to Patricia Whitmore. Patricia was the kind of neighbor who seemed to think she was personally responsible for enforcing every community standard ever written. She'd leave notes on people's cars if they parked too close to her driveway. She'd report kids for riding bikes on the sidewalk too fast. She once called a special HOA meeting because someone 3 streets over painted their front door a shade of blue that was allegedly not on the approved color list. Rebecca had crossed paths with Patricia more than once. There was the time Patricia reported her for having a small decorative garden gnome that was apparently against the tasteful lawn ornament guidelines. Then there was the incident where Patricia claimed Rebecca's car was parked aggressively in her own driveway because it extended 6 inches past where Patricia thought it should be. The woman was exhausting, but this pool situation? This was different. This wasn't about HOA rules or petty complaints. This was someone actually trespassing on her property. Rebecca went back inside and grabbed her laptop. A few weeks ago, after the first few times she'd noticed things were off, she'd installed a security camera system. Nothing fancy, just a couple of cameras that covered the backyard and pool area. She'd been meaning to check the footage but kept putting it off, telling herself maybe it was nothing. Now she wished she'd looked sooner. She sat down at her kitchen table and pulled up the security app on her laptop. The cameras stored footage for the past 30 days, and she started scrolling through the recordings from the last few weeks. She fast-forwarded through hours of empty backyard footage, then suddenly stopped. There, right there on the screen. 3 teenagers were climbing over her fence, not just walking through the gate, but actually climbing over the 6-foot fence like they were on some kind of mission. Rebecca leaned closer to the screen, her mouth falling open. She recognized one of them immediately. It was Trevor, Patricia's 17-year-old son. She watched as Trevor and his 2 friends dropped down into her yard, laughing and shoving each other. They stripped off their shirts and dove into the pool like they owned the place. For the next hour and a half, the footage showed them swimming, using her pool floats, doing cannonballs, and just generally having a great time. At one point, Trevor even walked over to her outdoor refrigerator, the one she kept stocked with drinks for when she had guests over, and helped himself to several cans of soda. Rebecca sat back in her chair, stunned. She kept watching. The next day's footage showed the same thing, and the day after that, sometimes it was just Trevor. Sometimes he brought friends. Once there were 5 kids in her pool. They were treating her backyard like their personal summer hangout spot. She felt a mix of emotions. Anger, definitely. Violation of her privacy. But also confusion. Did Trevor actually think this was okay? Did Patricia know her son was doing this? Rebecca grabbed her phone and called the HOA management office. A bored-sounding woman named Carol answered after 4 rings. "Hi, this is Rebecca Chen from 847 Maple Grove Drive," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "I need to file a formal complaint. I have security footage showing my neighbor's son has been trespassing on my property repeatedly, using my pool without permission." There was a pause on the other end. "Okay, well, have you tried talking to the neighbor about it?" Not yet, but I have video evidence of multiple incidents over 3 weeks. This is trespassing. Carol sighed, and Rebecca could hear papers shuffling in the background. Mrs. Chen, the HOA really can't get involved in neighborly disputes. This sounds like something you should work out between yourselves. Maybe have a conversation with the family. A neighborly dispute? Rebecca felt her frustration rising. This isn't about a property line disagreement or a noise complaint. Someone is repeatedly entering my private property without permission. I understand you're upset, but unless there's an HOA rule being violated, there's not much we can do. Have you considered calling the police? Rebecca thanked her and hung up, not trusting herself to stay polite. She immediately called the non-emergency police line and explained the situation to the officer who answered. He listened patiently and then gave her advice she didn't want to hear. Ma'am, since there's no immediate danger and no property damage, this would be classified as a civil matter. You could file a trespassing report, but honestly, the best course of action is usually to talk to the parents first. Let them know you have footage and that you want it to stop. If it continues after that, then we can look at filing formal charges. So I have video evidence of repeated trespassing, and I should just ask them nicely to stop? I know it's frustrating, the officer said, and he actually did sound sympathetic. But that's usually the fastest way to resolve these situations. If they refuse or it continues, then you've established that you've attempted to handle it reasonably, which strengthens any future legal action. Rebecca ended the call feeling defeated. She spent the rest of the evening watching more of the footage, documenting each incident with screenshots and notes. The pattern was clear. Trevor would show up around 1 in the afternoon on weekdays, right when he knew Rebecca would be at work. Sometimes he'd stay for an hour, sometimes 3. He'd always leave before 5, probably timing it so he'd be home before his mother expected him. The next morning, Rebecca stood in her backyard staring at the pool. The water sparkled innocently in the morning sun, giving no indication of all the unauthorized pool parties it had hosted. She thought about marching over to Patricia's house right then and confronting her, but something held her back. She knew Patricia. The woman would deny everything, probably accuse Rebecca of fabricating the footage or harassing her son. She'd twist it around somehow and make Rebecca look like the villain. That was Patricia's specialty. No, Rebecca needed a different approach. If the HOA wouldn't help and the police wanted her to handle it herself, then she'd handle it. But on her terms. She pulled out her phone and started researching smart lock systems for outdoor gates. If Trevor wanted to use her pool, he was going to find it a lot harder to get in from now on. And this time, she'd have even better evidence of every single attempt. Rebecca spent her lunch break that day researching security options. She wasn't just looking for any lock. She wanted something that would notify her the moment someone even touched her gate, something that would record every attempt, every shake of the fence, everything. After comparing about a dozen different systems, she settled on a smart lock that connected to her phone and had facial recognition capability. It wasn't cheap, but at this point she didn't care. The installation company could come out that Friday, which meant she had to endure 3 more days of knowing Trevor was probably still using her pool. She checked the camera footage each evening, and sure enough, there he was. Tuesday afternoon, 90 minutes in her pool with 2 friends. Wednesday, just him alone for about an hour. Thursday, 3 kids this time, and they even ordered pizza delivery to her backyard address. That last one really got to her. They'd ordered pizza to her house. The delivery driver had walked right into her backyard and handed it to them like this was totally normal. Friday couldn't come fast enough. The installation technician arrived at 8 in the morning, a friendly guy named Dave who took one look at her setup and nodded approvingly. Nice pool, he said. And yeah, this smart lock system is going to work great here. You'll get alerts for everything. Someone touches the gate, you'll know. Someone tries to enter a code, you'll know. It even has a feature where you can talk through the speaker if you need to. Perfect, Rebecca said. That's exactly what I need. Dave worked for about 2 hours installing the new lock mechanism on the gate and syncing it to her phone. He showed her how to use the app, how to set up custom alerts, and how to review the access logs. By the time he left, Rebecca felt like she had a legitimate security system protecting her property. She sat on her back porch that afternoon, phone in hand, waiting. Part of her felt a little silly, like she was staking out her own house. But another part of her wanted to see what would happen when Trevor showed up and found his private pool party spot suddenly locked down. She didn't have to wait long. At 1:15, her phone buzzed. Motion detected at pool gate. She opened the app and switched to the live camera view. There was Trevor standing at the gate with two of his friends. He reached for the handle like he'd done dozens of times before, but this time it didn't budge. He tried again, pulling harder. Nothing. Rebecca watched as Trevor's expression changed from confusion to frustration. He said something to his friends, though she couldn't hear the audio from where she was sitting. Then he started shaking the gate, really rattling it hard. Her phone buzzed again with another alert. Possible forced entry attempt detected. One of Trevor's friends pointed at the new lock, and they had a brief conversation. Then Trevor actually tried to climb the fence, getting about halfway up before apparently thinking better of it and dropping back down. After a few more minutes of them standing around looking annoyed, they finally left. Rebecca felt a small surge of satisfaction. Problem solved, right? That evening, she was in her kitchen making dinner when she heard aggressive knocking on her front door. Not a polite knock. The kind of pounding that said whoever was on the other side was already angry. She looked through the peephole and saw exactly who she expected. Patricia Whitmore stood on her porch, arms crossed, face red with fury. Rebecca took a deep breath and opened the door. "Hi, Patricia. What can I do for you? You can explain to me why you've turned your backyard into some kind of fortress." Patricia snapped, not even bothering with pleasantries. "That ridiculous lock on your pool gate is completely hostile and unwelcoming. This is a community, Rebecca. We're supposed to be neighborly. It's a lock on my private property," Rebecca said calmly. "I don't think that's unreasonable. That's not just a lock, that's some kind of high-tech surveillance system. I saw the cameras, the motion sensors, all of it. What are you so paranoid about? This is a safe neighborhood." Rebecca felt her jaw tighten. "I'm protecting my property from trespassers." "Trespassers?" Patricia let out a harsh laugh. "Who's trespassing?" "You're being dramatic." This was the moment. Rebecca could either back down and let this woman bully her, or she could stand her ground. She pulled out her phone and opened the security app. "Would you like to see the footage of your son using my pool without permission for the past 3 weeks?" Patricia's expression froze. "What are you talking about?" Rebecca turned her phone around, showing Patricia a compilation clip she'd created. There was Trevor, clear as day, climbing over the fence, swimming in the pool, using her stuff, helping himself to her outdoor refrigerator. The timestamp showed it was from just 2 days ago. Patricia stared at the screen and Rebecca watched her face cycle through several emotions. Surprise, then denial, then anger. "That's not, where did you get that? You can't just film people without their permission." "On my own property?" "Yes, I can. And I have weeks of footage showing Trevor and his friends trespassing repeatedly." "Trespassing is a strong word," Patricia said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. "Maybe he thought it was a community pool. It's an honest mistake." "A mistake he made 15 times over 3 weeks?" Patricia's face flushed darker. "You know what your problem is, Rebecca. You're selfish. You have this beautiful pool that you barely even use, and you can't stand the idea of young people enjoying it. You'd rather lock it up and install all this security equipment than be a good neighbor and share." Rebecca felt her temper rising but kept her voice level. "My pool is on my private property. I paid for it. I maintain it. I'm responsible for the liability if anyone gets hurt in it. Trevor doesn't have permission to be here, and honestly, Patricia, the fact that you're defending him right now instead of apologizing is telling. I don't have anything to apologize for, and this conversation is over." Patricia turned to leave, then stopped and looked back. "That lock better comply with HOA aesthetic standards. And those cameras better not be pointing at anyone else's property. I'll be filing a complaint." She stormed off before Rebecca could respond. Rebecca closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. She'd known Patricia would react badly, but that had been even worse than expected. No acknowledgement that Trevor had done anything wrong. No apology, just immediate defensiveness and threats. Her phone buzzed with another alert. She checked it and saw that someone was at the gate again. It was Trevor, alone this time, and he was really going at the lock. He was trying different things, pulling on it, pushing it, trying to find some way to disengage it. Rebecca watched for a minute, then decided to use the intercom feature Dave had shown her. She tapped the button and spoke into her phone. "Trevor, I can see you. Stop messing with the lock and leave my property." On the screen, she saw Trevor jump about a foot in the air. He looked around wildly, trying to figure out where her voice had come from. Then he spotted the camera, stared directly at it for a moment with wide eyes, and took off running. Rebecca actually laughed. Maybe she was taking some petty satisfaction in this, but after 3 weeks of dealing with this situation, she felt entitled to it. The weekend was quiet. No alerts, no attempts at the gate, no angry neighbors pounding on her door. Rebecca actually got to enjoy her pool for the first time in weeks without wondering if someone had been using it while she was gone. Monday morning, she woke up to 17 notifications on her phone. She scrolled through them with growing disbelief. Every single one was from the HOA complaint system. Patricia had apparently spent her entire Sunday evening filing reports. Smart. Lock not approved by architectural committee. Security cameras too visible from street. Gate modification violates community standards section. Point 3. Excessive security measures create hostile environment. Motion sensor lights pointed toward neighboring properties. The list went on, and Rebecca sat at her kitchen table staring at the complaints. Every single one was frivolous. The smart lock looked like a regular lock from the outside. The cameras were pointed at her own property. She'd checked the HOA rules herself before installing anything, but she knew what Patricia was doing. This was retaliation, pure and simple. By Tuesday afternoon, Rebecca had received a formal letter from the HOA requesting that she attend a compliance meeting to discuss the concerns raised by community members regarding her recent property modifications. The meeting was scheduled for the following Monday. She knew she needed to be prepared. Patricia wasn't going to let this go, and if Rebecca wasn't careful, she might actually end up being forced to remove her security measures because of some technicality in the HOA rules. That evening, Rebecca started gathering her evidence. She compiled all the security footage showing Trevor's trespassing. She pulled up her property survey documents showing the exact boundaries of her lot. She reviewed every single section of the HOA rules that Patricia had cited in her complaints and documented how she was in full compliance. She even started researching property law and liability issues just in case. Wednesday morning brought another surprise. Rebecca was working from home when her phone buzzed with an alert. She checked the camera feed and saw Trevor at the gate again, but this time he wasn't alone. He had what looked like a toolbox, and one of his friends was holding something that made Rebecca's stomach drop. Bolt cutters. They were actually going to try to. Rebecca stared at her phone screen in disbelief. Trevor was positioning the bolt cutters around the lock mechanism, while his friend stood lookout, glancing nervously up and down the street. This wasn't just trespassing anymore. This was property damage. This was attempted break-in. This was something the police couldn't just brush off as a neighborly dispute. She grabbed her phone and dialed the non-emergency police number, but then stopped. This was happening right now. Active destruction of her property. She hung up and dialed 911 instead. 1, what's your emergency? Someone is trying to break into my property with bolt cutters. I'm watching it happen on my security camera right now. Rebecca gave the dispatcher her address and a description of what was happening. Are you in the house? Are you safe? Yes, I'm inside. They're in my backyard trying to cut through the lock on my pool gate. I have video footage of the whole thing. Officers are on the way. Stay inside and keep your doors locked. Don't confront them. Rebecca kept the dispatcher on the line while watching the camera feed. Trevor was having trouble with the lock. The bolt cutters weren't quite strong enough to get through the hardened steel mechanism Dave had installed. Trevor kept trying different angles, grunting with effort. His friend was getting more nervous, constantly checking his phone and looking around. Then something unexpected happened. Trevor pulled out his own phone and made a call. Rebecca couldn't hear what he was saying, but she could see his mouth moving. He was talking to someone, gesturing at the lock, pointing at the camera. He looked frustrated and angry. 4 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up in front of Rebecca's house. She watched on her front door camera as 2 officers got out and headed down the side path toward her backyard. At almost the exact same moment, another police car pulled up. These officers also headed toward the back. That was weird. Why would 2 separate units respond to a break-in at a residential property? Rebecca's doorbell rang. She opened it to find one of the officers standing there, a woman maybe in her 30s with a no-nonsense expression. Ma'am, I'm Officer Delgado. You called about someone trying to break into your property? Yes, my pool gate. I have video of the whole thing. They're still back there. Can you show me? Rebecca pulled up the live feed on her phone. The screen showed Trevor and his friend still at the gate, but now they were talking to the other pair of officers who'd arrived. Trevor was pointing at the lock at the camera and appeared to be explaining something. Officer Delgado's expression shifted. "Okay, I need you to stay here for a moment while I sort this out. Do you have the full footage we can review? I have 3 weeks of footage showing repeated trespassing, plus today's attempted break-in. Everything's time-stamped and backed up to the cloud." The officer nodded and headed around back. Rebecca stood in her doorway trying to process what was happening. Why were there 4 police officers in her backyard? Why did Trevor look like he was explaining something to them, instead of being questioned about the bolt cutters he was literally holding? 10 minutes later, Officer Delgado came back to the front door, this time with her partner. "Ma'am, can we come in and talk?" Rebecca let them into her living room, her stomach twisting with anxiety. Had she somehow done something wrong? Was the smart lock illegal? Were the cameras a problem? "So we've spoken with the young man in your backyard," Officer Delgado said. "He claims he called 911 because you've illegally locked him out of a community amenity that he has permission to use. He says his mother told him the pool was available for neighborhood families." Rebecca felt her jaw drop. "What? No, this is my private pool on my private property. I can show you the property survey. I can show you weeks of footage of him trespassing." "That's what we figured," the other officer said, a middle-aged man whose name tag read Chen. "But we need to see that documentation. Can you show us?" Rebecca pulled out her laptop and spent the next 20 minutes showing them everything. The property survey clearly showing the pool was within her lot boundaries. The HOA documents confirming it was private property, not a community amenity. The compilation of security footage showing Trevor and his friends repeatedly climbing over the fence and using the pool without permission. Officer Chen watched the footage with growing disbelief. "And you've never given him permission to use the pool?" "Never. I didn't even know it was happening until 3 weeks in when I finally checked the security cameras. I filed a complaint with the HOA, but they said it was a civil matter. I called the non-emergency line last week and was told to try to work it out with the neighbors first. But you did install the smart lock to prevent further trespassing?" Officer Delgado asked. "Yes, is that a problem?" "No, it's your property. You have every right to secure it." She glanced at her partner. "The bolt cutters are a bigger issue, though. That's attempted criminal damage to property." They went back outside. Rebecca followed, standing on her porch where she could see into the backyard. The officers had Trevor and his friend separated now, asking them questions. Trevor kept pointing at the lock, at the camera, clearly trying to explain his side of things. His friend looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. Officer Chen approached Trevor with Rebecca's phone, showing him the compilation footage. Rebecca watched Trevor's face go pale as he realized what he was looking at. Weeks of evidence, time-stamped, undeniable. The conversation went on for another 10 minutes. Rebecca saw Trevor's shoulders slump. His friend was picked up by his parents, who looked mortified when the officers explained what was happening. Trevor sat on Rebecca's pool deck, head in his hands, while the officers took photos of the bolt cutters and the scratches on the lock mechanism. Finally, Officer Delgado came back to talk to Rebecca. "So here's where we are. The young man admits he's been using your pool without permission. He claims his mother told him it was fine, that you were hogging a community resource, and that he had a right to access it. His mother is the one who's been filing HOA complaints against me for installing the lock." The officer nodded slowly. "That tracks with what he's saying. He genuinely seems to believe his mother that the pool should be available to him. But belief doesn't change the law. This is your private property. You have clear documentation and he's been trespassing repeatedly. What happens now? We're going to cite him for trespassing and attempted criminal damage to property. Those bolt cutters were clearly intended to destroy your lock. Because he's 17 and this is a first offense, he'll likely get a warning and maybe some community service if it goes to court. But it'll be on record. And what about his mother?" Officer Chen joined them. "We can't do anything about her directly unless you want to pursue harassment charges for the HOA complaints. But we will be having a conversation with her about giving her son incorrect information about property rights, and we'll be making it very clear that any further trespassing or property damage will result in more serious charges." Rebecca felt relieved, but also exhausted. "I just want this to stop. I just want to use my own pool without worrying about who's been in it or what I'm going to find messed up in my backyard." "That's completely reasonable," Officer Delgado said. She handed Rebecca a business card. "This is the incident report number. Keep all your footage backed up. If there are any more problems, call us directly and reference this case. We'll have it on file." After the officers left, taking Trevor with them to bring him home and talk to his mother, Rebecca went into her backyard and examined the lock. There were deep scratches on the metal where the bolt cutters had tried to bite through, but Dave had installed quality hardware. The lock had held. She sat down on one of her pool loungers, the same one Trevor had used so many times, and just stared at the water. 3 weeks of trespassing, multiple complaints filed against her, a 17-year-old kid with bolt cutters, police in her backyard, and all she'd wanted was to enjoy her pool in peace. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Rebecca Chen?" The voice was male, professional, slightly irritated. "Yes, this is David Whitmore, Patricia's husband. I just got a call from the police department saying my son has been arrested for trespassing on your property." "He wasn't arrested. He was cited." "There's a difference." "Whatever. Look, I think we can resolve this without involving lawyers or courts or making this into a bigger thing than it needs to be." Rebecca sat up straighter. "Your son has been trespassing on my property for 3 weeks. Today he tried to destroy my lock with bolt cutters. I'd say it's already a pretty big thing. Trevor is a good kid. He made a mistake. My wife told him the pool was available for the neighborhood to use, and he believed her. Can you really blame a teenager for listening to his mother? I can blame him for climbing my fence, using my property without permission, and trying to cut through my lock." There was a long pause. "What do you want?" "Money for the damage to the lock? An apology? What would make this go away?" Rebecca thought about that for a moment. What did she want? "I want it to stop completely. No more trespassing. No more HOA complaints from your wife. No more harassment. I want to live in my house and use my pool without dealing with any of this." "That's reasonable. I'll talk to Patricia, and Trevor will write you an apology letter. But I need you to understand." Rebecca thought that would be the end of it. She really did. David had sounded reasonable on the phone. The police had made things crystal clear. Trevor had been caught red-handed with bolt cutters. Surely that would be enough to end this nightmare. She should have known better. Thursday morning, she woke up to find a flyer tucked under her windshield wiper. Not just her car, but every car on her street. The flyer had a photo of her pool taken from someone's upstairs window, and beneath it, bold text that read, "Should private pools be shared? One neighbor says no to community families. Sign the petition to make Oakmont Hills more neighborly." At the bottom was a website link and Patricia's email address. Rebecca stood in her driveway holding the flyer, feeling her blood pressure rise. This wasn't just continuing the harassment. This was escalating it. Patricia was trying to turn the entire neighborhood against her. By the time Rebecca got to work, her phone was already buzzing with notifications. Someone had posted the petition to the Oakmont Hills Facebook group, a page with over 600 members. The post had dozens of comments already. Some people are so selfish with their amenities. If you can see it from other yards, it should be shared. That's just being a good neighbor. I remember when this community actually felt like a community. But there were other comments too. Wait, isn't that private property? Why would someone have to share their pool? This seems like there's more to the story. Patricia Whitmore is the one posting this? She literally called the cops on my son for riding his skateboard on the sidewalk. Rebecca resisted the urge to engage. Getting into a Facebook argument would only make things worse. But watching the comments roll in, seeing people she'd never even spoken to making judgments about her character based on Patricia's propaganda, was infuriating. At lunch, her doorbell rang. She checked the camera and saw Tom Richardson from 3 houses down. Tom was retired military, kept to himself mostly, but had always been pleasant in their brief interactions. She opened the door. "Hi, Tom. Hey, Rebecca. Listen, I just wanted to give you a heads up. Patricia's been going door to door this morning with a petition. She's telling people that your pool should be classified as a community amenity because it's visible from surrounding properties. That's not how property rights work. I know that. I told her that. But she's getting signatures. A lot of signatures. She's planning to present it at the next HOA board meeting and demand they force you to either share the pool or remove it entirely. Rebecca leaned against the door frame. She can't be serious. She's very serious. And she's spinning this whole thing like you're the bad guy. She's not mentioning that her son was trespassing. She's just saying you installed hostile security measures and are refusing to be a team player. Did you sign it? Tom snorted. Hell no. I told her she was way out of line. But I'm not the only person she's approaching. She's hitting up everyone, especially the ones with kids. She's making it sound like you're depriving children of safe recreation. After Tom left, Rebecca spent her lunch break reading the HOA bylaws again. She searched for anything about shared amenities, about community resources, about any possible loophole Patricia could exploit. But it was all very clear. Private pools on private property were the owner's responsibility, and the owners alone. There was nothing about visibility from neighboring yards creating any kind of shared access rights. That evening, she found a violation notice from the HOA in her mailbox. 3 new complaints had been filed. Security camera positioning violates privacy expectations per community standards. 12.4. Smart lock aesthetics not pre-approved by architectural review committee per section 8.2. Pool. Fence height exceeds maximum allowed height per section. 15.7. Rebecca measured her fence that night with a tape measure. 6 feet exactly, which was precisely the maximum height allowed. She reviewed the architectural guidelines for locks and hardware. Nothing about smart locks specifically, and the lock looked identical to a standard deadbolt from the outside. And the cameras? She'd triple-checked their positioning before installation. They pointed at her property, not anyone else's. These complaints were completely frivolous, but they still required a response. Each one needed documentation, photos, measurements, citations of the specific rules she was supposedly violating. Hours of work to defend herself against complaints that had no merit. Friday brought another surprise. Rebecca came home from work to find someone had left a note taped to her front door. Not an official HOA notice, just a handwritten note on yellow legal paper. You should be ashamed of yourself. Kids need places to play and cool off in the summer. Your selfishness is making this neighborhood a worse place for families. I hope you can sleep at night knowing you're making children miserable. It wasn't signed. Rebecca took a photo of it and added it to her growing file of documentation. She was building a case now, not just defending herself, but preparing for whatever Patricia's next move would be. That weekend, she ran into her next-door neighbor, Denise Park, at the grocery store. Denise had lived in Oakmont Hills longer than anyone, had been through 4 different HOA boards, and generally knew everything about everyone. Rebecca, honey, I need to talk to you, Denise said, pulling her aside near the produce section. Patricia is planning something big for the HOA meeting Monday night. She's got a whole presentation prepared. Charts, legal precedents, the whole 9 yards. Legal precedents for what? For declaring your pool a visible community feature and arguing that you should be required to either allow supervised community access hours or face fines. Rebecca felt her stomach sink. She can't do that. Probably not, but she's going to try. And she's got at least a dozen people planning to speak during the community comment period to support her. All parents, all complaining about how you're being unwelcoming to families. Denise, her son was trespassing. For 3 weeks. The police cited him for it, Denise nodded. I know, I heard about that. But Patricia's version of the story is very different. She's telling people that Trevor thought he had permission, that it was an honest misunderstanding, and that you overreacted by calling the police on a child. He's 17, and he had bolt cutters. I'm just telling you what she's saying, and people are listening. You need to be prepared Monday night. Bring evidence. Bring documentation. Bring everything. Sunday evening, Rebecca's doorbell rang again. This time it was Greg Nakamura from across the street. Greg was an attorney who worked in real estate law, and Rebecca had always gotten along well with him. Rebecca, I heard about the HOA meeting tomorrow, he said. Tom Richardson filled me in on what's been happening. Can I see your property survey and the HOA bylaws sections Patricia's citing? They sat at her kitchen table for 2 hours. Greg reviewed every document, every complaint, every piece of evidence Rebecca had compiled. He took notes, cross-referenced sections of the HOA rules, and pulled up a few legal precedents on his laptop. Finally, he sat back and shook his head. She doesn't have a case. Not even close. Your pool is unambiguously private property. Visibility from neighboring yards is completely irrelevant to ownership rights. The complaints she's filing are frivolous and you're in full compliance with all HOA rules. So I'm good for the meeting? You're good legally. But politically? Greg grimaced. That's trickier. If Patricia gets enough community support, the board might feel pressured to do something even if they know it's not legally sound. They might propose new rules, create a committee to study the issue, something to appease the crowd without actually ruling against you. What should I do? Bring everything. Property survey, bylaws citations, the police report from Trevor's trespassing, documentation of all the frivolous complaints Patricia's filed. And if I were you, I'd reach out to some of the other neighbors who've had problems with Patricia. Tom mentioned there are others. That gave Rebecca an idea. She spent Sunday making phone calls. Tom had mentioned Patricia reporting kids for minor things. Denise had stories going back years about Patricia's complaints and demands. There had to be others, she was right. By Sunday evening, she'd spoken to 7 different neighbors who'd all had run-ins with Patricia. Mrs. Hoffman, whose grandson got reported for drawing with sidewalk chalk on his own driveway. The Jacobsons, who received a violation notice because their vegetable garden allegedly violated the decorative landscape requirements. Kevin Torres, who was threatened with fines because Patricia claimed his work truck parked in his own driveway was commercial vehicle storage. Each person had a story. Each person had documentation. And each person was willing to come to the HOA meeting. Monday evening arrived faster than Rebecca wanted. She'd taken the day off work to prepare, printing documents, organizing everything into a neat folder with tabs and categories. She felt like she was preparing for a trial. The HOA meetings were held in the community center, a bland room with folding chairs and a long table at the front where the 5 board members sat. By the time Rebecca arrived at 6:30, the room was already half full. She spotted Patricia near the front, surrounded by a group of women Rebecca vaguely recognized from the neighborhood. They were all looking at something on Patricia's laptop and nodding seriously. Tom and Denise saved Rebecca a seat near the middle. Greg sat behind her. Mrs. Hoffman and the Jacobsons were. Patricia's presentation was impressive, Rebecca had to admit. She had charts showing the square footage of Rebecca's pool compared to average backyard pools. She had photos showing how the pool was visible from at least 4 neighboring properties. She even had a survey she'd conducted asking residents if they thought visible recreational amenities should be available for supervised community use during summer months, according to my survey of 63 households. Patricia said, clicking to a pie chart. 72% believe that in a community like ours, sharing resources makes us stronger. Only 16% said pools should be completely private, and the remaining 12% were undecided. She went on for nearly 15 minutes. She talked about building community bonds. She mentioned liability insurance and how the HOA could coordinate supervision schedules. She brought up property values and how family-friendly amenities made the neighborhood more desirable. She showed photos of Trevor and other neighborhood kids who supposedly had nowhere safe to swim in the summer heat. The whole time, she never once mentioned the trespassing. Never mentioned the bolt cutters. Never mentioned the 3 weeks of unauthorized use. When Patricia finished, several people clapped. Rebecca felt her stomach twist. "Thank you, Ms. Whitmore," William Drake said. "Are there others who wish to speak on this matter during public comment?" 5 people stood up. All parents. All friends of Patricia. One by one, they came to the front and spoke about how wonderful it would be to have community pool access, how their kids would benefit, how Rebecca's refusal to share showed a lack of community spirit. The third speaker, a woman Rebecca had never even spoken to, actually teared up while talking about how her daughter asked every day why she couldn't use the pretty pool at the end of the street. Rebecca felt like she was in an alternate reality. These people were painting her as some kind of villain for wanting to use her own property. Then Tom Richardson stood up. "I'd like to speak," he said, and something in his tone made the room go quiet. Tom walked to the front and turned to face everyone. "I've lived in Oakmont Hills for 12 years. I've served on this HOA board twice, and I've watched Patricia Whitmore file complaints against almost every family on this street at one point or another." Patricia's face went red. "That's not relevant to—" "Let him finish," William Drake said. Tom continued. "Mrs. Hoffman, you got reported because your grandson drew on your driveway with sidewalk chalk. The Jacobsons got a violation notice for growing vegetables in their own yard. Kevin Torres was threatened with fines for parking his work truck in his own driveway. I could go on. Patricia has filed over 40 complaints in the past 3 years alone. 40. Against her neighbors. For minor, petty things that violated no actual rules. He turned to look at Patricia. And now you want us to believe you're suddenly concerned about community spirit? About sharing? You've spent years making this neighborhood less friendly, less welcoming, and now you're upset because someone won't let your son use their pool without permission? My son thought he had permission, Patricia snapped. And none of this is about my past HOA involvement. This is about, your son was cited by police for trespassing and attempted property damage, Tom said flatly. That's not a misunderstanding. That's criminal behavior. The room erupted. Half the people were talking at once. Patricia was shouting something about slander. William Drake was banging a gavel trying to restore order. When things finally calmed down, Greg Nakamura stood up. I'm an attorney specializing in real estate law. May I address the board? William nodded, looking relieved to have someone speak who might actually know what they were talking about. Greg laid out the legal reality in clear, simple terms. Private property was private property. Visibility from neighboring yards created no ownership rights. The HOA had no legal authority to force a homeowner to share private amenities. Any attempt to do so would expose the HOA to significant legal liability. Furthermore, Greg said, pulling out some papers, I've reviewed all the complaints filed against Ms. Chen regarding her security measures. Every single complaint is without merit. Her cameras point only at her own property. Her fence is exactly the maximum allowed height, not an inch over. Her smart lock complies with all architectural standards. These complaints appear to be retaliatory in nature, filed by someone upset that they can no longer trespass. Patricia stood up, shaking. This is ridiculous. I'm being attacked here for trying to make this community better. My son made an honest mistake. And instead of handling it like a reasonable person, Rebecca called the police. On a child. Over using a pool. Rebecca had been quiet long enough. She stood up, folder in hand. May I present evidence to the board? She asked. William Drake nodded. Please, Rebecca walked to the front. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her voice was steady. She connected her laptop to the projector and pulled up the security footage compilation she'd prepared. This is 3 weeks of footage showing Trevor Whitmore trespassing on my property, she said. The video played. Multiple days. Multiple times. Trevor climbing the fence. Using the pool. Taking things from her outdoor refrigerator. Sometimes alone, sometimes with friends. The room had gone completely silent. This isn't a one-time mistake, Rebecca continued. This is a pattern of deliberate trespassing. And when I installed a lock to prevent it, Trevor showed up with bolt cutters and tried to destroy my property. She clicked to the police report, projecting it onto the screen. This is the official incident report. Trevor Whitmore was cited for criminal trespassing and attempted property damage. The police confirmed after reviewing all evidence that this is my private property, and I have every right to secure it. She turned to face the room. Patricia talks about community spirit, about sharing, but she's filed 40 complaints against neighbors for minor issues. She's never once offered to share anything of her own. And when her son got caught breaking the law on my property, instead of apologizing, she launched a harassment campaign against me. Rebecca pulled out the stack of frivolous HOA complaints, the nasty note left on her door, the flyers distributed around the neighborhood. She laid them all out for the board to see. I didn't want any of this, Rebecca said quietly. I just wanted to use my pool, my private pool, on my private property that I paid for and maintain. I installed security because someone was trespassing. That's not hostile. That's reasonable. And being pressured to give up my property rights because someone's upset they got caught breaking the law. That's not community spirit. That's bullying. She sat down. The room was still silent. William Drake cleared his throat. The board will need to discuss this, but I think it's clear that I'd like to speak. Mrs. Hoffman stood up, her voice surprisingly strong for such a tiny elderly woman. I've lived here 23 years. I've watched this neighborhood change. And I want to say that Rebecca is right. This isn't about community. This is about Patricia not liking being told no. Then Denise Park stood. I've seen Patricia bully people out of this neighborhood. The Hansons moved because of her constant complaints. The Rodriguezes sold their house after she reported them 12 times in 1 year. I don't want to see another good neighbor driven out because Patricia can't accept boundaries. One by one, more people stood up. Not everyone, but enough. They shared their stories of dealing with Patricia. The complaints, the demands, the unreasonable expectations. Patricia was shrinking in her seat, her confident presentation completely derailed. The board members were conferring quietly among themselves. Finally, William Drake spoke. After reviewing the evidence presented tonight, the board rules as follows. Ms. Chen's pool is unambiguously private property. She is under no obligation to share access with anyone. Her security measures are entirely appropriate and in full compliance with all HOA regulations. All complaints filed against her regarding these security measures are dismissed. He looked directly at Patricia. Furthermore, this board warns Ms. Whitmore that filing frivolous complaints is a violation of HOA bylaws section 22(8). Any further complaints that are found to be retaliatory or without merit will result in fines of $500 per complaint. This behavior stops now. Patricia shot to her feet. This is outrageous. You're all biased against me. My attorney will be hearing about this. Your attorney is welcome to review the bylaws and the evidence, William said calmly. This meeting is adjourned. Patricia stormed out, her supporters trailing behind her uncertainly. The room slowly emptied. Several neighbors stopped to tell Rebecca they were sorry she'd had to deal with all this. Mrs. Hoffman gave her a hug. Greg patted her shoulder and said she'd done great. Tom walked her out to her car. That took guts, he said. Standing up to Patricia like that. I was terrified. Couldn't tell. You were calm, collected, had all your evidence ready. That's how you win these things. Rebecca drove home feeling emotionally drained but relieved. The board had ruled in her favor. Patricia had been warned. Maybe this really was over. The next morning, she found Trevor's apology letter in her mailbox. It was clearly written under duress, stiff and formal, but it acknowledged the trespassing and the property damage and promised it wouldn't happen again. 2 days later, she saw a moving truck in front of the Whitmore house. At first, she thought they were